Welcome, my dear guests, to the captivating expanses of my story. Chapter 12, 2210. Imperatrix Sevia Heimber pulled her fur-trimmed cloak tighter around her as she climbed the icy steps of the Imperial University. Paulina, Romero and Myra Gupta flanked her, their clouds of breath mingling in the frosty air. The old university building loomed before them, its towers and battlements covered in hoarfrost as if it had come straight out of a fairy tale. "Looks like we've caught the perfect weather for a somber speech," Paulina muttered, her hand instinctively on the grip of her gun. Her eyes darted vigilantly over the snow-covered roofs of the surrounding buildings as if she expected an attack at any moment. Sevia gave her a sharp look, her blue eyes sparkling with determination. "Today is not about the row threat, Paulina. These young people have worked hard to reach this day. Let's not take away their joy." Myra nodded in agreement, a warm smile curving her lips despite the biting cold. "Exactly. Let's try to give them some hope along the way. They are the future of our kingdom, and we need their energy and optimism more than ever." They entered the large auditorium, where hundreds of graduates were gathered in their gowns. The room hummed with hushed excitement and nervousness. The tension was palpable, a faint whisper of the unknown threat lurking at the realm's edge hovering over the heads of those present like an invisible fog. Some students looked worried at the heavily armed guards discreetly positioned along the walls. But when Sevia mounted the podium, her presence filling the room, all conversation abruptly ceased. The tension gave way to a pregnant silence. "Dear graduates," Sevia began, her voice firm and clear. "You stand here today on the threshold of a new era. Yes, our kingdom is facing challenges. But they are challenges that we will meet with knowledge, innovation, and determination." She let her gaze wander over the crowd, seeing the mixture of pride and uncertainty on their faces. "Each one of you has the potential to advance our empire. Whether in the laboratories of Xanadu, on the bridges of our starships, or in the colonies of Citisim, your skills, your ideas, your passion fuel our future." Paulina stepped forward, her posture militarily straight. "The empire needs your strength, your discipline. In times of uncertainty, it is often the bravest among us who lead the way." Myra followed, a warm smile on her lips. "And don't forget that progress doesn't just happen in leaps and bounds. Every small contribution, every new idea can be the spark that ignites a revolution." Sevia nodded gratefully to them before turning back to the graduates. "You are the future of Kasach. Do not let the challenges discourage you, but see them as opportunities to grow, learn, and strengthen our empire." When the Imperatrix finished her speech, applause broke out. The tension in the air had eased, replaced by a cautious enthusiasm. Sevia saw some graduates talking with renewed fire in their eyes, exchanging ideas and making plans. As she stepped off the stage, Myra whispered, "I think we've reached them." Paulina nodded grimly. "Let's hope their enthusiasm lasts when they face the reality out there." Sevia did not answer, but a slight smile played around her lips. For a moment, the cold outside, the threat on the horizon, had lost its power. Hope sprouted in this room full of young, brilliant minds. Hana Hussein paced thoughtfully through the long corridors of the government building. The Sade threat had been on her mind for days, and she hoped that the upcoming meeting with Dr. Elias Chen, a leading xenobiologist, would bring new insights. When she entered the conference room, Dr. Chen rose respectfully. His eyes shone with scientific curiosity. "Ambassador Hussein, it is an extraordinary honor to receive you." Hana nodded curtly, her expression serious and focused. She got straight to the point. "Dr. Chen, what can you tell me about these mysterious beings? Every detail could be of crucial importance." The scientist activated a high-resolution hologram that showed the squid-like creatures in all their alien splendor. Their shimmering bodies floated majestically through the simulated space. "After months of meticulous analysis, I've come to a fascinating conclusion," he explained with muted enthusiasm. "It is undoubtedly a species that lives entirely in space. Their unique physiology suggests that they have adapted perfectly over eons to life in a merciless vacuum." Hana frowned, her sharp mind immediately weighing up the implications. "Do I understand you correctly, Dr. Chen? You assume these beings do not immediately threaten our planetary settlements?" "Most likely not," Dr. Chen confirmed with an approving nod. His voice took on an almost reverent tone. "I would strongly recommend that they no longer be classified as a threat. In reputable scientific circles, We have agreed to refer to such fascinating space creatures as Tianki. Hana let the strange name melt on her tongue, savoring every syllable. Tianki, she repeated thoughtfully while her mind was already playing out the diplomatic consequences of this new insight. A few hours later, Hana stood before the Imperial Senate, surrounded by the mighty columns of the venerable Assembly Hall. With a firm voice and commanding presence, she presented Dr. Chen's groundbreaking findings. Her words echoed through the room as she made the revolutionary proposal to change the official designation of these cosmic beings. Honorable Senators, she concluded her remarks, I advocate that the so-called Shade menace be referred to as Tianki from now on. This aligns with scientific vocabulary and will help us view these creatures more objectively. A murmur went through the hall. Nadine Heimber, the representative of the Helix Church, stood up. Ambassador Hussein, I have concerns. How can we be sure that these Tianki are harmless? Hana took a deep breath. She had expected resistance. Senator Heimber, our xenobiologists have found no signs of aggressive intent. On the contrary, the Tianki appear to be peaceful gas guzzlers who are only interested in the atmospheres of gas giants. But their very existence could threaten our genetic purity, Nadine argued. Hana smiled gently. Senator, from the point of view of genetic purity, in particular, the Tianki are highly interesting. They have adapted to life in space over eons. Their genetic structure must be extremely stable and perfect. Nadine hesitated, visibly surprised by this argument. Her eyes widened, and her usually confident gaze began to flicker momentarily. Hana recognized the opportunity and made clever use of it. She leaned forward slightly, her voice full of conviction. In fact, we could learn from them how to maintain genetic integrity over eons. Imagine the knowledge we could gain, Senator Heimber. Slowly, almost reluctantly, Nadine nodded. Her voice sounded thoughtful as she replied, I see your point, Ambassador. Perhaps we should indeed look at these beings with different eyes. Their perspective opens up interesting possibilities for our research. After intense debate, the Senate finally voted in favor of the renaming. Hana breathed a sigh of relief, easing the tension in her shoulders. It was a small but significant step towards understanding and progress. In the days that followed, Hana worked closely with Almar Kazan. The renowned news anchor, known for his in-depth analysis, produced a riveting series of documentaries about the Tianki. His work promised to change public perception fundamentally. The Tianki, Kazan's sonorous voice explained as stunning footage of the majestic creatures flickered across the screen, are the result of an incredible evolution. Their ability to survive and thrive in the merciless vacuum of space is a testament to a genetic purity and adaptability unparalleled in our known galaxy. Hana watched with growing satisfaction as the population of Kasach slowly began to regard the Tianki with fascination and awe rather than fear. The initial skepticism gave way to a deep admiration for these extraordinary creatures of the cosmos. Myra Gupta stared at the holograms before her and rubbed her temples. The numbers danced before her eyes, but the result remained unchanged. She sighed deeply. The resources available were insufficient to implement the construction projects she had worked on. She got up from her desk and stepped to the window. Outside, Xanadu pulsed with life, the skyline dotted with glittering towers. Myra knew that behind this facade, the megacorporations were fighting for every ounce of profit. An idea formed in her mind. With energetic steps, she left her office and made her way to the Imperial Senate. The corridors of the government building echoed in her footsteps. She paused briefly in front of the massive doors of the Senate chamber, straightened her shoulders, and stepped inside. The senators fell silent as Myra mounted the podium. She let her gaze wander over the assembly and then began in a firm voice, Honorable Senators, I have a proposal that will not only save our construction projects but also strengthen our economy. Myra activated a complex hologram with deft finger movements that visualized the resource gap in dazzling colors. The three-dimensional representation rotated slowly and revealed the discrepancy between demand and supply. As you can see, ladies and gentlemen, we lack the essential minerals for our ambitious projects. Therefore, I suggest that we acquire the missing resources from the private sector via the imperial market. An incredulous murmur swelled in the hall and grew louder. Senator Voss, his face flushed with anger, jumped up. His voice almost broke. That's outrageous. We can't possibly. Myra silenced him with an elegant but firm gesture. Her eyes sparkled with determination. Please, let me explain further. As they say, this strategy would kill two birds with one stone. On the one hand, we would support the megacorporations in this difficult phase, and on the other, we would open up completely new, promising opportunities for the entire economy. The discussion that ensued was like an inferno of words. Voices were overturned, and arguments flew through the room like projectiles, colliding with each other with the force of colliding planets. Amid this chaos stood Myra, an island of calm at the podium. She dissected every objection with the precision of a surgeon, countering with razor-sharp facts and irrefutable figures. Nadine Heimber slowly rose to her feet. Her voice, clear and cutting like a crystal sword, cut through the tumult. And what about the long-term consequences for our self-sufficient supply? Won't that make us dangerously dependent on the corporations? A knowing smile flitted across Myra's face. Quite the opposite, dear sister Nadine. This well-considered step will stimulate our industry long-term and enable us to operate even more independently in the long run. Time seemed to stretch on. Hour after hour passed. The sun, once high in the sky, sank lower, shrouding the Senate chamber in a warm, golden light. Myra's throat felt parched, her voice had become a hoarse whisper. But the fire of conviction blazed unabated in her eyes. She would not give up, not now when so much was at stake. Finally, Imperatrix Sevia Heimber rose to her feet with a grace that captivated everyone in the room. As if on command, every sound and whisper died away. A hush fell over the assembly, so thick you could have heard a pin drop. Sevia's penetrating gaze rested on Myra, scrutinizing her with an intensity that made her shiver. Then, it slowly glided over the rows of assembled senators, considering each one with the same attention. I have listened carefully to your arguments, she began, her voice calm and deliberate, each word chosen carefully. And after careful consideration, I have come to a decision. Myra felt her chest tighten. Her breath hitched as her heart pounded like a steam hammer against her ribs. The seconds stretched into a seeming eternity. We will, Sevia continued, her voice now imbued with an authority that brooked no dissent, follow Governor Gupta's suggestion. There was a brief, meaningful pause. As a result of this, I officially authorize the purchase of 1,000 cubic tons of minerals through the imperial market. A collective exhalation, half relief, half disbelief, flooded the room like a wave. Myra's shoulders, which she had unconsciously tensed, slumped. A feeling of overwhelming relief flooded through her. Her knees threatened to give way, but she forced herself to stay upright. A barely perceptible smile flitted across her lips. She had made it against all odds. Dr. Elena Voronova entered the lab in Xanadu with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Her heart raced as she thought of the recent reports from Citisim, which had alerted the xenobiologists. She took the sealed sample of the Marincurin plant with trembling hands from the security container. The purple leaves shimmered eerily even through the glass. Elena took a deep breath and carefully placed the sample under the high-resolution microscope. She stared spellbound through the eyepiece. As she examined the strange structure of the plant, her eyes widened more and more. A cold shiver ran down her spine. It can't be, she murmured in disbelief. The pollen molecules bore a frightening resemblance to the descriptions of a plant from the ancient legend of the lotus eaters. Elena rubbed her eyes, but the image remained unchanged. Heart pounding, she called her colleague Dr. Maximilian Weber over. Max, take a look at this, she said in a shaky voice and stepped aside. Dr. Weber, a tall man with graying hair, leaned curiously over the microscope. After a moment, he whistled softly through his teeth. The resemblance is unmistakable, he confirmed with a furrowed brow. But how is that possible? A plant from an alien planet that resembles a plant from Earth legends? He straightened up and looked at Elena questioningly. The two scientists exchanged shocked glances as they tried to grasp the potential implications of their discovery. Meanwhile, the effects of the Marincurin on Citisim were becoming increasingly apparent. Governor Elena Volkov stood on the balcony of the administration building, looking anxiously over Knossos city. The streets, usually bustling with activity, were strangely quiet. Here and there, she saw groups of settlers wandering with dreamy expressions. It's getting worse, Volkov said to her assistant. Productivity has dropped by 30%, and the reports of strange behavior are piling up. Her communicator beeped shrilly through the oppressive silence. Volkov flinched and activated the device. It was an urgent message from Dr. Thales, the head of the Gene Priest Enclave. His usually calm voice sounded urgent. "Governor, we have made an extremely disturbing discovery. It is of the utmost importance. Please come to the northern excavation site immediately." Volkov felt her stomach tighten. She gave her assistant brief instructions and set off without hesitation. The flight in the atmosphere shuttle seemed endless. When she finally arrived at the excavation site, her breath caught in her throat. Before her stretched a gigantic field of fossils, eerily perfectly preserved in the peaty, dark earth. Dr. Thales, usually calm and collected, rushed towards her. His face was a disturbing mixture of scientific fascination and deep, almost panicked apprehension. "Governor, you need to see this," he urged, leading her to a freshly exposed spot. His hands were trembling slightly. These fossils belong to an ancient fauna of Citisim, possibly millions of years old. But the truly frightening thing is that they all seem to have died right here, on the spot. It wasn't a slow process, it happened suddenly, catastrophically. Volkov knelt down, ignoring the mud on her uniform, and took a closer look at the remains. Among the bones and petrified soft tissue, she recognized something that made her heart race. An eerie premonition crept over her. "Are these?" she whispered, her voice filled with shock, unable to finish the sentence. "Yes," Dr. Thales confirmed with a grim expression. His voice was barely more than a whisper. "Petrified remains of the Murinkurin, perfectly preserved and embedded among the fossils. It is unmistakable. The resemblance is disturbingly precise." He took a deep breath. Everything indicates that this scenario played out an unimaginably long time ago. "And now, Governor, I fear we may be at the beginning of a repeat." The Imperial Senate members hurried through the palace's vaulted corridors, their footsteps echoing off the marble walls. An oppressive heaviness hung in the air as the massive doors of the Senate chamber slammed shut with a muffled sound. Imperatrix Sevia Heimber, an imposing figure in flowing, jeweled robes, strode with a dignified air to the raised podium and took the chair. The azure hologram of Emma Hart, the brilliant scientist, flickered above the assembly. Deep worry lines dug into her forehead, her eyes shone feverishly. Emma cleared her throat, a hint of tension in her voice. "Honorable Senators," she began, her words echoing through the hall. "The situation on Citisim has come to a dramatic head. The pollen of the Murinkurin plant is turning out to be a curse for our colonists. Our meticulous investigations reveal a shocking truth: it induces a state of permanent lethargy that stifles any will to live." A murmur of disbelief swelled, interspersed with worried whispers. Emma pressed her lips together and continued with a serious expression. "The gene monks of the Echidna Enclave have unearthed fossils during their excavations that confirm our darkest suspicions. Time is of the essence, dear colleagues. If we do not act immediately, our colonists face a cruel fate. They will starve to death in agony, trapped in their apathy." Nadine Heimer stood up, her ascetic figure towering like a memorial. Her gray eyes sparkled with an intensity that seemed to penetrate even the flickering hologram. "Senators," her voice echoed through the hall, "this is further incontrovertible proof of the timeless wisdom of our Church. The expansion we have so recklessly pursued holds nothing but danger and disaster. We must radically change our course, return to our roots, and concentrate all our energies on cost." Sevia let her gaze wander over the assembly, registering every movement. Some senators nodded in agreement, their expressions hardened by newly awakened fear. Others shook their heads vehemently, resentment in their eyes. The air crackled with tension, and Sevia felt the atmosphere in the room tighten, heavy with unspoken conflict. "Quiet, please," Sevia demanded, her voice cutting through the burgeoning murmur like a sword. She turned to Emma, whose hologram now seemed to be flickering. "Is there any way to mitigate the effects? A way to protect the colonists without immediately?" Emma interrupted her, her face a mask of regret and scientific sobriety. "Unfortunately not, Imperatrix. We've gone through every conceivable option. The only solution left to us would be a complete, uncompromising extermination of the Murinkurin. Anything else would just be delaying the inevitable." Sevia took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders like lead. In her mind's eye, she saw the faces of the colonists who had set off full of hope and confidence to open up a new world. She could not let them down. "We cannot and will not sacrifice our citizens," Sevia finally declared, firm and determined. The hall fell silent, all eyes on her. "I hereby order the targeted, complete extermination of the Marinkaran. Whatever the cost, we will secure Citizen for our colonists and eliminate this threat once and for all. Nadine opened her mouth to protest, but Sevia raised her hand. I understand your concerns, Nadine. But we can't allow our people to suffer. This is not a matter of expansion but of survival. The senators murmured. Some nodded in agreement, and others looked worried. Sevia knew this decision would have consequences, but she had no choice. Emma, Sevia turned to the hologram, coordinate the extermination with Governor Volkov. Be careful and thorough. We can't take any chances. Emma nodded gravely. Understood, Imperatrix. We will begin immediately. Emma Hart stood bent over the screen in her quarters on the Ek Asimov. Her eyes flitted over charts and data as she worked feverishly on a plan to contain the spread of the dangerous Marinkaran plant on Citizen. The bluish displays cast a ghostly light on her face as she ran through various scenarios. Suddenly, the shrill sound of the onboard alarm shattered the silence. Emma flinched, her heart stopped for a moment. A cold sweat broke out as the reality of the situation hit her. What the hell? She muttered and jumped to her feet. Her legs trembled slightly as she hurried with quick steps to the door of her quarters, which slid aside with an ominous hiss. The corridor was bathed in pulsing red alarm light, making the shadows dance. Crew members ran around frantically, their faces masks of fear. Frantic shouts and the pounding of hurried footsteps echoed through the narrow corridors. Emma grabbed a passing lieutenant by the arm, his uniform sweaty and crumpled. What's going on? She asked, her voice hoarse with tension. We're being boarded. He gasped, his eyes wide with panic. He gasped as he said, the Row threat, they're on board. They came out of nowhere, our shields. They were useless. A dull roar shook the ship, shaking the ground beneath their feet. Metal creaked and groaned under the immense pressure of the intruders as if the Ek Asimov itself was moaning in pain. Emma ran, her mind racing as adrenaline pumped through her veins. She had to reach the bridge and help defend the ship. Every second counted, and the responsibility weighed heavily on her shoulders. As she turned a corner, her breath caught in her throat. A gigantic, crystalline figure loomed in front of her. Twice the size of a human, the creature shimmered in the pulsating red alarm light. Multifaceted surfaces reflected the light in a hypnotic, almost vivid pattern. Emma instinctively backed away, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. The smell of molten metal and alien rock filled the air. The lithoid creature moved with surprising agility for its massive form. Crystalline outgrowths scraped across the corridor's metal walls, leaving deep, jagged furrows. Sparks flew at every touch. Like the rending of steel, a loud screech filled the air as the creature charged towards Emma. Its eyes, if it had any, glowed an eerie, cold blue. She whirled around and ran. Her breath came in gasps as she desperately searched for a way out. The pounding of crystalline feet on the metal floor echoed behind her, each step a thunderous announcement of approaching death. Emma turned sharply to the left, her boots squeaking on the slippery floor. She almost slipped and hit the wall hard. A sharp pain shot through her shoulder, but adrenaline and pure fear of survival drove her on. A group of crewmen appeared before her, their faces masks of determination and fear. They were armed with phasers, their hilts gleaming in their sweaty hands. With grim determination, they opened fire on the onrushing lithoids. Bright beams of energy flashed through the air, filling the corridor with the smell of ozone. But to Emma's horror, the beams bounced off the crystalline bodies without effect, leaving at most superficial traces of melting. Emma ducked under a wildly flailing crystal arm, felt the heat of the movement on her skin, and plunged on. The screams of her comrades echoed in her ears as the invaders overran the defenders. Emma knew they had no chance. With trembling hands, she activated her communicator. Hard to bridge. We must abandon ship. Activate the self-destruct protocol. The Imperial Senate of Kasach met in an atmosphere of paralyzing bewilderment. The news of the aggression of the Row threat and the destruction of Ek Asimov echoed like ominous thunder through the venerable chamber. Senators sat in their seats with ashen faces, while Imperatrix Sevia Heimber sat enthroned at the head of the table with a stony expression. Paulina Romero, the military commander, stood up with clenched teeth. Her eyes sparkled with suppressed anger as she smoothed her uniform. We must act immediately. The Row threat has declared war on us. Her voice echoed through the hall, filled with determination and barely concealed anger. Nadine Heimber of the Helix Church shook her head. Her robes rustled softly as she straightened in her seat. No, we must not let fear guide us. Perhaps it was a misunderstanding. Her words sounded reassuring, but there was worry in her eyes. The debate swayed back and forth, voices rose and overlapped until Sevia commanded calm with an imperious gesture. Her piercing blue eyes fixed on every single senator. No one will fly beyond the Q-turn system to avoid further incidents. The Whaledi system is a no-fly zone effective immediately. Her words cut like a knife through the heated atmosphere. A collective murmur went through the hall. Chairs scraped across the floor as the senators shifted uneasily. Myra Gupta frowned, her usually friendly features hardening. But what about our expansion plans? Her voice trembled slightly, betraying her concern for the Empire's future. The safety of our people is our top priority, Sevia replied in a cutting voice. Her gaze swept over the assembled senators, a silent challenge to contradict her. The air in the chamber seemed to vibrate with tension and unspoken fears. When the Senate dissolved, Sevia withdrew to her private chambers. There, away from the eyes of her subordinates, she dropped her mask for a moment. The tragic death of Emma Hart hit her like a punch in the gut. She had lost her research minister and a longtime confidant and friend. Sevia stared out of the window at the glittering skyline of Xanadu. Emma had always believed in her vision of an expanding, progressive Kasach. Her death could not have been in vain. Sevia turned to the holograms floating in front of her with a new resolve. She had to find a successor for Emma, someone with brilliance and vision. Her eyes lingered on one profile, Dr. Rita Griffin, a young scientist with an impressive track record. The next day, Sevia called a special meeting of the Senate. I now appoint Dr. Rita Griffin as the new Minister of Research, she announced. She will be assigned the Ekibon Batuta as a research vessel. Surprised murmurs filled the hall. Rita Griffin, standing at the podium's edge, stepped forward with trembling knees. Thank you for your trust, Imperatrix. I will do everything I can to continue Emma's legacy. Sevia nodded appreciatively. Then she turned to Myra Gupta, commissioned the Siddha shipyard to build a new ship for Chausiku Uba. Myra bowed. It will be done, Imperatrix. As the meeting ended, Sevia felt hope for the first time in days. Emma might be dead, but her spirit would live on in her successor's actions. Kasach would not be intimidated by the Ro threat. They would be cautious, but they would not stop reaching for the stars. Andrea Sauer stood on the bridge of the Ek Ptolemy, her hands resting on the cold metal railing. She stared spellbound at the CDNC system through the huge viewports. The red subgiant star, a colossal ball of fire on the edge of its life, bathed the room in an eerie, pulsating light. It danced across the control panels and cast flickering shadows on the walls. 7 lifeless planets orbited the aging star in identical orbits, silent witnesses to a cosmic eternity that captivated Andrea. Scan analysis complete, Commander, reported Lieutenant Tanaka. His calm but firm voice cut through the devout silence on the bridge like a thunderclap. Andrea snapped out of her contemplation and nodded curtly. Transmit the report to Kasach. She turned away, her eyes wandering again over the system's barren worlds. Rocky surfaces, icy poles, and dusty deserts stood out on the screens. Despite the obvious lifelessness, Andrea was fascinated by the raw, unadulterated beauty of this unexplored frontier. The communications panel beeped shrilly. Incoming message from Fleet Command, Lieutenant Garcia announced, his fingers flying over the console. Andrea approached the communication station and read the displayed instructions. A smile flitted across her face, her eyes shining with excitement. New course, Lieutenant Tanaka. We are departing for the Scifo system. While the crew prepared for the hyperspace jump with precise, practiced movements, Andrea took one last nostalgic look at CDNC. This system's secrets, hidden under dust and ice, would remain uncovered for the time being, but new adventures were already waiting on the horizon. Lena Schultz received new orders on board the ex-Susquehanna in a remote corner of the Empire. The ship was hovering in orbit around an icy planet, its bluish surface shimmering through the bridge window. An outpost in the CDNC system, she murmured as her fingers glided over the hologram of the star chart. She marked the route across the Bono-Waryak system and frowned. It's going to be a long and tricky journey. Her first officer, Viktor Petrov, stepped beside her and leaned over the three-dimensional display. His eyes narrowed as he studied the flickering lines of the hyperlanes. We must navigate with extreme caution, Captain. The hyperlane through Bona Warriak is notoriously unstable. The gravitational anomalies there have thrown many a ship off course. Lena nodded grimly, her jaw muscles tensing. She weighed the risks against the strategic importance of the mission. Prepare the crew, Victor. Inform all departments. I want to be ready to go in an hour. We can't afford any delays. The CITES system was bustling with activity. The shipyard workers were putting the finishing touches to the Ek Equinox while Chalsiku Ubo went on board. Her eyes shone with awe and determination. Not far away, Rita Griffin boarded the Ek Ibn Battuta. She took a deep breath, her new responsibility weighing heavily on her shoulders. In the KNN studios, Almar Kazan was preparing for a special broadcast. The spotlights came on, and the camera's red light flashed. Good evening, citizens of Kasach, Almar began. Today, we are reporting on the latest developments in our galactic expansion. With me is Professor Dmitry Volkov, an expert in Imperial affairs. Almar turned to his guest. Professor Volkov, what do you think of the simultaneous operations in various systems? The gray-haired man cleared his throat. It's a bold move, Almar. Our fleet is expanding like never before. The exploration of the Scifo system by the Ek Ptolemy could open up crucial resources. At the same time, the planned outpost in the CDNC system will secure our influence in the region. And what do you think about the developments in the CITES system? Almar asked. The commissioning of the Ek Equinox and the Ek Ibn Battuta shows our determination to explore the unknown, Volkov replied. Commander Uba and Commander Griffin bear great responsibility. Their missions will expand our understanding of the universe and consolidate Kasach's position as a leading power. Construction work on the Gen Monastery is also in its final stages. I have word that the Echidna faction will be in charge there. Professor Volkov added. On December 9, 2210, disturbing rumors echoed through the corridors of power on Kasach. Whispering voices spoke of gigantic life forms lurking in the depths of distant solar systems. These creatures, it was said, were of such unimaginable size and strangeness that their very existence could shake the citizens' faith. Nadine Heimber sat in her office in the Helix Temple and stared at the reports piled up in front of her. Her brow was furrowed as she read the words that spoke of leviathans and eldritch entities. She felt a cold dread in her stomach, but at the same time, a determination to protect the people of Kasach from these disturbing truths sprouted within her. We must act, she murmured and rose from her chair. With energetic steps, she crossed the room and stepped to the window. Outside stretched the glittering spires of Xanadu, unaware of the cosmic horrors that might be lurking out there. Nadine turned to her assistant, who was waiting patiently by the door. Call the High Council of Genetic Guardians together. We need to develop a strategy. Hours later, Nadine sat at the head of a long table, surrounded by the serious faces of the High Council. The air in the room was heavy with worry and tension. My brothers and sisters, Nadine began, her voice firm and determined. We are facing a test of our faith. These rumors of unimaginable creatures in the far reaches of space threaten to shake the foundations of our teachings. Murmurs rose among those present, but Nadine raised her hand and continued, but we must not allow fear and doubt to enter the hearts of our believers. Instead, we must interpret this threat for what it truly is, a test of our faith. Nadine let her penetrating gaze wander over the assembled faces. She recognized a flicker of approval in the eyes of the council members that spread like wildfire. We will reveal the truth to the people of Kasach, she announced firmly. These rumors are nothing more than a divine test. A test of our unwavering devotion to genetic purity and the sacred teachings of the Helix. With every word Nadine spoke, her doubts disappeared like wafts of mist in the morning sun. The conviction solidified in her heart, crystal clear and irrefutable. She not only believed in her words, she lived them. The need to protect society from the impending chaos that such shattering revelations could bring burned within her like a blazing fire. Let us act immediately, she continued in a raised voice, her hands clenched into fists. We will prepare sermons that touch the souls of our believers. Write scriptures that will strengthen their hearts. Strengthen our community like never before. Her eyes sparkled with determination. We will set before them the unshakable truth, our faith is a bulwark stronger than any cosmic threat. The power of genetic purity will envelop us like a shield and show us the way, no matter what horrors the universe has in store for us. The members of the High Council nodded in agreement, their faces a mixture of awe and newfound determination. Nadine's conviction flowed through the room like a tangible force, engulfing each individual and forging them into an inseparable unit. They shared an unwavering determination to defend the sacred teachings of the Helix against any threat. When the meeting finally broke up and the council members left the room, Nadine was alone momentarily. She approached the table on which a hologram of the Kasach sector was gently pulsing and floating. The three-dimensional representation showed star systems, planets, and the vast expanse of space. Nadine's gaze was lost in the depths of the hologram. Somewhere out there, in the unfathomable vastness of the cosmos, beings beyond her wildest imagination might be lurking. A shiver ran down her spine, but she straightened her shoulders. With grim determination, she swore to herself that she would not allow these alien thoughts to shake the unshakable faith of her beloved people in the slightest. Hey, I would be happy if you could give my video a like, leave a comment and subscribe to my channel to stay up to date.